do want to go through a bit of a presentation introducing the concept of Bitcoin custody and Bitcoin security, just to have everyone on the same page in sort of a mental framework. That's what the purpose of this presentation is going to be. I'm also going to introduce what we mean by the hard way and how this all ties together. So I'll try to fly through this so we have plenty of time for the Q&A. Our journey actually starts 2,700 years ago. There was a man by the name of Hesiod, an ancient Greek poet, and a lot of his wisdom has survived through the ages. He actually predates Plato and Socrates, and the quote that I want to share with everyone today is this: "Before the gates of excellence, the high gods have placed sweat, and the path to her is long and steep and rough at first. Yet when one arrives at the top, then it becomes easy, difficult though it still is." And of course, what Hesiod's referring to is something that pretty much everyone is somewhat aware of, more or less, which is that as we go through life and we have different tasks in front of us, typically we can take the short and easy path or the longer and harder path. If someone has sort of longer term goals of excellence, then the longer and more difficult path is typically going to be the better approach to success. And I'll just go through a few quick examples so everyone understands what I mean by this. Everyone's got to eat. So if you want to get a meal each day, in America, we are blessed with food abundance. And so the easy way to get a meal might be just going through the drive-through at a fast food joint or having food delivered to your doorstep these days. The hard way looks more like, growing a garden or going to the grocery store, getting the ingredients yourself and making a home-cooked meal. Of course, either one of these approaches is going to succeed with the task of getting a meal. But if you have that longer-term goal of excellent health, you're going to have more control if you are putting the meal together yourself. You have more control over what you're putting into your body. Another quick example, passing a class. The easy way might be to cheat on the test or use AI to write an essay for you. Of course, the hard way looks more like reading the books and studying the material. If you have a goal of excellence in the subject, then you're going to need to do the work. Getting money. You could try the easy, risky way of gambling, or some people might engage in illicit activity. But the hard way, as we know, is more like building wealth. It's taking the time to plan and have discipline with your spending and have smart investments and stuff like this. So really the point that I'm trying to make is that the hard way is good for long-term goals. And this is something that Bitcoin holders allude to quite a lot, talking about proof of work, putting in the work, low time preference, which essentially means delayed gratification, making sacrifices in the short term for payouts down the road. And sort of the reverse is true as well. If people take the easy way for everything, then it tends to come back and bite you, and the sacrifices still come, but they come down the road. So we're going to come back to this idea in a minute, but really what this presentation is focused on is the question of what is the best way to secure Bitcoin? And I'm going to give you the answer right away. It's sort of the classic unsatisfactory answer of it depends, but that is the truth. It depends on what your goals are with the Bitcoin. Once you have that figured out, you can start to learn the best approach to securing it. So I would encourage everyone in the audience, if you haven't pondered this question yet, you certainly should, which is why do you want to hold Bitcoin in the first place? And I've talked to hundreds of different folks over the years, and I've heard many different responses to this question. But I would say that generally all answers fall within kind of two primary categories. The first kind of category of answer to this question is looking at Bitcoin as more of like a short-term speculative asset. People might think that the Bitcoin price is going to increase substantially within the next year or the next few months or weeks. And so they decide they want to buy some Bitcoin and wait for the price to go up and then sell it. And the end result is that they've made a profit. They have more dollars. That's certainly a reasonable goal for someone to want to have, because, as we all know, dollars are constantly depreciating over time. And so even just to stay afloat and keep up, people feel this need to get more and more dollars just to preserve their wealth. So a lot of folks are looking for short-term trade opportunities, and that makes total sense. But the other way of viewing Bitcoin is more of like a long-term savings view. And it's sort of built on the same premise that owning dollars over the long term is problematic because of the inflation, because of the depreciation. But this view sees it a bit differently. Rather than wanting to kind of chase after more and more dollars all the time, why not just use a completely different tool that doesn't have any inflation to preserve long-term wealth and measure your savings according to that? So that's another reason that a lot of folks will seek Bitcoin, right? And there's actually a lot of different assets besides Bitcoin that people use to try to preserve long-term wealth. Index funds like the S&P 500, real estate, land, gold, art. These are all tools that people try to use to preserve long-term wealth. But as Michael Saylor, in a presentation he delivered last year, I really appreciated these couple of slides where he points out that all these other tools that people are using, they still have some long-term risk associated with them, right? There's going to be physical risk factors and or financial risk factors. If you hold an index fund as your long-term savings and the economy tanks, then perhaps when you need your savings the most, your savings are worth less, right? Real estate and land, over a long enough period of time, there's going to be weather affecting it and deterioration, natural disaster risk, property taxes eating away at the value. Gold has an inflation rate, and it also has costs for securing it. Art depreciates over time, etc. So this is sort of an unsolved problem, but borrowing from that same presentation that Michael Saylor gave, I really like this slide as well. It shows that, sure, land and gold are going to be better at preserving wealth than maybe a fiat currency. But once you start to hit that several decade point or a century or something like that, then you really do have to contend with value deterioration. Whereas Bitcoin, with a fixed supply and therefore no inflation and no physical risks, it's potentially a 1,000-year asset. It's a giant leap in terms of long-term savings technology. Returning to the question of how to actually secure Bitcoin, and I said earlier that it really needs to be according to your goals. So if we look again at these sort of two main reasons for owning Bitcoin in the first place, if you have that shorter term view of wanting to sell the Bitcoin once the price goes up, which could be in the near future, it might make sense to hold your Bitcoin at an exchange or in an ETF or something, because that's going to be convenient to the goal that you have. You're going to have a sell button right there for you, and it doesn't necessarily make sense to go to much extra lengths. But of course, if you have a goal of long-term savings, that's how you're treating your Bitcoin, then you might want to hold that Bitcoin in a way that actually minimizes risk. That would be consistent with your goal for owning it in the first place. So choosing anything that doesn't minimize risk as your method of holding the Bitcoin, that sort of creates a bit of a inconsistency with what you're trying to achieve. So that leads us into another question of how do you actually minimize long-term risk while holding Bitcoin? And this is where things do start to get a bit trickier. Because we need to actually identify what the long-term risks are, first of all. And once we do that, we can start to evaluate all of the different ways of holding Bitcoin according to those risks. And there are a lot of different options. There's a lot of different combinations of options that people could consider. So it gets pretty overwhelming pretty fast. Starting with what are the risks? There are many risks, as I'm sure you're aware. I have just some visuals on the screen here. A lot of people have heard the story of the guy who threw out a hard drive by mistake and it's in a landfill somewhere, it's like the keys to 8,000 Bitcoin, like $1 billion worth of Bitcoin. So, that's a way to lose Bitcoin. FTX exchange collapses, a bad guy walking in with a $5 wrench and demanding your Bitcoin. There's all kinds of scammers out there. The Apple Twitter account got hacked and tried to get people's Bitcoin. Hardware wallets can malfunction. You've got natural disasters. The list goes on. There's many risks that aren't even on this slide. So how do we start to really simplify this and make it a little bit more manageable? Turns out that you can really break down the risks into two main categories, which are loss and theft. These are the two ways that your Bitcoin could leave you. These are the two fundamental risks. So loss really describes a scenario where you've put the Bitcoin somewhere, but you've lost your means to actually access that Bitcoin. So this would look like losing key material or losing account credentials to get into your Bitcoin. And then theft, of course, you might still have the means to access the Bitcoin, but the Bitcoin's no longer where you put it because your locking mechanism failed you, or somebody else also got the means to access the Bitcoin and they took it away from you. So these are really the two main risks that people have to contend with. And we can use these two risks now to actually start to look at the main approaches to Bitcoin custody and compare them and see how they stack up for this goal of long-term savings. Using an exchange account is a way that a lot of people start out trying to hold Bitcoin. Something like Coinbase, you can buy Bitcoin there and it's an entry point. But what are the problems? Well, first of all, you are trusting a custodian. So the custodian has the power to block you from your money. This is sort of like a lost access type of threat. Especially you could imagine if you're in a oppressive government regime or something, they might order the exchange to block you from your Bitcoin. And regimes rise and fall in every country, so that risk is always present. Also, the custodian itself might do nefarious things with the Bitcoin it's responsible for holding. So that might be issuing more claims to Bitcoin than they actually have, or rehypothecating funds. This is some of the stuff we saw with FTX, with Celsius, with BlockFi not that long ago. So that's a real risk. Additionally, custodians could also become a victim of theft themselves. So there's exchange hacks every year. There's been like $7.5 billion stolen from exchange hacks over the years. They are a big target for attackers because they're holding so much Bitcoin. And then lastly, the custodian might fail to block access from an attacker, meaning someone that's trying to get into your account at the exchange and pretend that they're you and withdraw the Bitcoin. One thing that a lot of people think that they don't have much responsibility with an exchange account, but the truth is you still have to actually secure that exchange account well with password, two-factor authentication and stuff. So there's still some work to be done, and that's a challenge actually for a lot of folks. Moving on from exchange accounts, we have the ETFs, which are also custodians. So you'll notice that the problems are very similar. One difference is that if someone gets into your brokerage account, they can't just withdraw the ETF shares like they could withdraw Bitcoin for an exchange account. So that does kind of help eliminate that particular problem. But on the other hand, one of the other problems is sort of expanded, which is the blockage from your own money. You're actually somewhat blocked by default when you use an ETF. You can't just send your Bitcoin somewhere. If you wanted to move your Bitcoin into another arrangement, you'd typically have to like sell the ETF and then move money around in dollar form. So potentially incurring capital gains tax and being out of the market and stuff like this. So ETFs are sort of the Hotel California of Bitcoin custody. If you use that as your main tool, you might be stuck there, or it'd be difficult to get out. And then the third kind of main way of looking at Bitcoin custody, of course, is self-custody. And this is taking matters into your own hands, holding your own keys. but you can imagine there's some concerns with that as well. You might misplace the key. Your key could get destroyed in a natural disaster, like a fire or a hurricane or something like this. The key to your Bitcoin could get stolen. And then also, since ultimately it's you who's responsible for the Bitcoin, you could yourself be tricked by malicious information like a scammer or trusting the wrong person for help. So I think we can all empathize with this tweet. This is something that I saw when I was putting this presentation together. I thought it fit real nice, which is Bitcoin in self-custody is somehow both comforting and terrifying at the same time. We can empathize with this because it's comforting to take self-custody in one sense because you're no longer relying on a custodian, but it's also a bit scary because now you're taking on a lot of responsibility. You have to manage key material, and you could make a mistake. Now that we've looked at these kind of three main ways that people are using to approach Bitcoin custody, we need to get to the bottom of the question of which can actually reduce long-term risk the most. Each of them have their own set of trade-offs. So what's actually the best route? And this is where it all comes together, because if we return to the idea of the easy way versus the hard way, everyone has the task of securing Bitcoin, and the easy way looks like signing up for an account and clicking a few buttons and trusting a custodian. The hard way looks more like getting your hands dirty and actually learning how Bitcoin keys work and learning how proper self-custody works. Typically, the hard way is going to involve learning about a hardware wallet, learning about seed phrases, learning about different things you can do with the seed phrase and with combining keys. And so there's definitely a lot more work involved. But if our long-term goal is excellence with securing Bitcoin and minimizing risk, making sure you still have your Bitcoin years from now, decades from now, you do have more control when you take the hard way and you take self-custody. You don't really have any control when you trust a custodian because you don't control Coinbase, but you can control yourself and you can control what it is that you know and build your confidence with self-custody. So the rest of this presentation is just going to quickly run through what it looks like to go down the hard way and succeed with self-custody. Again, for people who have never taken self-custody before, the main tools at your disposal are hardware wallets, which is how you can generate your secret Bitcoin key. It's just secretive information that controls your Bitcoin. And then typically when you generate that key, you're also going to be writing down some words, which are the seed phrase. And that's a representation of the secret key information as well. So that if your hardware wallet breaks or gets lost or stolen, you can load the seed phrase into a new hardware wallet and you'd be able to use your key again. So I've talked to a lot of people navigating self-custody, and I've seen a lot of different strategies to try to protect themselves from these kind of two main threats of loss and theft. And so they have their hardware wallet, they have their seed phrase, and they start making all these kinds of contraptions to try to protect themselves. They might make a copy of their seed phrase and put it somewhere else to try to protect against loss. Some people try to split up their seed phrase into different sets of words and then spread those out. Some people try to encrypt their key, they encrypt their seed phrase in some form or fashion. There's also a tool people use that's called a passphrase on top of the seed phrase. So some of these methods are good at kind of protecting against loss. Other methods are pretty good at protecting against theft. Usually there's the trade-off that if it's better against loss, it's actually you're increasing your vulnerability to theft, and vice versa. If you're protecting against theft, you're actually increasing your vulnerability to loss. Some other creative stuff people try to do, they'll try to spread out their Bitcoin across multiple keys and multiple wallets to remove single points of failure for their entire Bitcoin balance. But actually what they're doing is increasing the number of single points of failure that they have for portions of their Bitcoin. So they're more likely to lose some amount of Bitcoin. And then people will really go all out and combine some of these methods, maybe make introduce a passphrase, make copies of the passphrase, copies of the seed phrase, and put them all over the place. And so people are creative and they know what they need to do. But luckily, there's actually a Bitcoin native solution that gets at the heart at what people are really trying to accomplish here. And that's multisig or multisignature. What multisig does is it creates several components, and then a subset of them are needed to access the Bitcoin. You can have several pieces spread out in different locations. You do need to be thoughtful about how many pieces you have and how many of the pieces are needed in order to access the Bitcoin, because if all of the components are needed, then you do have a vulnerability to loss. Meanwhile, if only one piece is needed, then you do have a vulnerability to theft. So it's really anything in between where you need less than all the pieces, but more than one piece. That's where you can succeed at protecting yourself quite well from both loss and theft in a self-custody setup. And so the simplest example would be 3 components, and you need 2 out of the 3. That way, any one piece could get lost, stolen, or destroyed, and you could still access your Bitcoin. Your Bitcoin's still safe. You could reconfigure your security and be good to go. So we've talked about, there's all these components that people need to manage if they're going to be doing multisig. And so the question becomes, this is the hard way. It sounds pretty complicated. Do I have to do it all alone? You don't need to do the hard way all alone. There's also collaborative custody, which is what Unchained does. So I had to throw this in here as well. Collaborative custody, you've got these several components. You can have expert guidance from a professional institution just to help you navigate the components. And you can actually have an institution maybe hold a minority of components. You're not trusting them as a custodian of your Bitcoin, but you could hold 2 pieces, and the custodian or the institution could custody just one component, one key, and help minimize the things that you're responsible for. So does this method have problems? Really, the problems of self-custody here, the collaborative custody sort of addresses each of them with solutions. So the misplacing of a key or destroying a key getting destroyed or stolen, that's solved because there are multiple backup keys. So again, any one key could suffer that fate and you'd still be able to access your Bitcoin. And then when it comes to you being tricked by malicious information, at least you have professional institution for guidance. So you have expertise that you can rely on, and it's much harder to be tricked. Okay, so I want to get to the Q&A here as soon as possible. So just to recap, what is the best way to secure Bitcoin? It depends on your goals, really. If your goal is to treat it as long-term savings, the best way is going to be an approach that reduces your long-term risk. The risks fundamentally are loss and theft. And how can you reduce those risks the most? By taking the hard way, which is self-custody multisig. So that is my presentation. Thank you all for listening, and I'm looking forward to getting in here to some of the audience questions.